I would accept an endorsement from literally Satan if I thought it netted us like 1 or 2 points in the aggregate.
Basically, if you're president, you use the bully pulpit a little bit, you call them into your office and you say, you could be a hero and they'll build statues to you, or you'll be my biggest enemy.
In my mind, this is a very unserious thing to propose.
I do think that the realities of the 50-50 split Senate would make it extremely difficult and very dangerous for President Biden to have put the sort of pressure on Joe Manchin that you talk about.
A lot of the comments were like, gullible, naive Hutch. He has no idea how power works in DC. Oh, norms? LOL. There's just an appetite for authoritarianism in leftist spaces online. So, friends, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you do, hit like, comment, subscribe. It really helps us out, and I appreciate everybody who does that. So the debate started because I made a video criticizing Kulinski. I made a video called Kyle Kulinski is wrong about Kamala's campaign. It was a pretty tame video. In the past, especially on the stream, I've gone real hard on Kyle Kulinski. Like I've lost my shit many times when it came to Kyle Kulinski. But for this video, I was pretty tame. And then he reached out in the comments of the video, and then he reached out on Twitter as well. Asked me if I wanted to have a conversation with him on Krystal Kyle and Friends, which is his podcast that he does with his wife. And then I said, hey, yeah, I'd love to have a conversation with you, but can I bring in my buddy Jessiah so that way it's a proper like 2v2? I didn't want to do like a 2v1 situation. Both of them are like pretty sharp. I don't agree with their opinions much of the time. I don't agree with their opinions, but they like Kyle makes like 6 videos a day. She's actually a really good interviewer. We watched her video with Jill Stein, but her interview with Jill Stein was like surprisingly, like I say surprisingly because I don't like her opinion sometimes, but she was really good in that interview. Jessiah said it was pretty tame and a good conversation. It was, yeah, and I think it was a good conversation. Yeah, they showed a serious lack of sharpness in this. We'll get to that. There's a couple opinions they put out there that I just don't agree with, but yeah. Jessiah and I went into this debate with a game plan to keep things like we didn't want it to get like super confrontational, and we actually did a fair amount of prep before this debate to make sure that we were on the same page about certain things, and if not, what do we do about that? So there was strategy to this debate. There were layers to it, and this is like a unique insight. There was literally, I believe, nothing that they said that we hadn't discussed. Like we had a couple phone calls before the conversation, and we tried to imagine like what do we anticipate them to say, and then we talked about like our responses to those things. And yeah, I'm pretty sure it was literally the case that everything they said was something that we had talked about and we had discussed. Like, how do we want to respond to that? How do we want to engage with that? So that made me like pretty proud. Actually, I was like, wow, pretty good debate prep. And yeah, listen, I don't really love like their opinions on a lot of issues. That's for sure the case. But the bridge is alive. The bridge is open. I anticipate that we'll have more conversations with these two in the future. And so, neither Jessiah and I, nor I, we didn't want to do like any kind of scorched earth kind of thing. And so if you're hoping for like a spicy screaming match, you're not going to get that. But there are some, I think, really interesting moments that we had of like fierce disagreement, and they make their case and we make our case. And then you guys can give your input as to who you think got the better of it. But yeah, let's go ahead and start this.
About Kamala's strategy and much more. Everybody please welcome Hutch and Jessiah from Pondering Politics. All right, Hutch and Jessiah from Pondering Politics, thank you guys for joining us. We appreciate it.
Likewise, man. Happy to be here. Appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, it's our pleasure.
Thanks for having us on.
No, our pleasure. All right, so before I ask the first question, let me just real quick ask you, I know if I had to categorize my beliefs in one label, I'd probably say I believe in social democracy. I know Krystal's the same. How would you guys characterize your political beliefs?
I'd say Soc Dem. I would say, yeah, to the extent that any sort of label applies, I would hew as closely as possible to Soc Dem.
Yeah, I'm not married to one particular label. I'd be fine if somebody called me a Soc Dem, center left, progressive liberal. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. So mostly on the same page. Maybe there's a slight disagreement in terms of Hutch. You might be slightly to the right of us. That's fair to categorize it?
Probably,
I think so.
Yeah.
I would say of the spectrum here, it's funny because Hutch and I are buddies, but I would say in some ways I'm leftward of him and probably a little right of you all with respect to just probably tactics only.
Gotcha. Okay.
I'm very sympathetic to a lot of your positions, even though I may disagree on the strategy.
Okay.
Did you see Destiny talk about this conversation? No. Did he make a video about it?
Hey, gotcha.
Yeah,
so
no.
Go
On that
ahead,
front,
dude.
though, like I'm not sure how much policy disagreement you and I have, or you and Krystal and I have, it's more for me about tactics. Like that's been the big source of disagreement that I've had with you personally.
Okay, gotcha. So we'll get into that. For everybody who doesn't know, Hutch released a video where he disagrees with my take on Kamala campaigning with Liz Cheney and, you know, citing Dick Cheney's endorsement of her. But we'll get to that in a little bit. Before we get to that, I do first want to upfront say that in some ways I actually sympathize with your argument. I do in this sense. There's a lot of people who I would describe as post-leftists who critique Kamala, and they say they're doing a strategic critique, but actually it's a substantive critique. So in other words, they'll criticize Kamala and say, why doesn't she do X? Then she does X, and then these people just move the goalposts and find a way of saying, I'm never voting for her. And a good example of that is Tim Walz. Like, Tim Walz was literally #1 on the list of people who I wanted Kamala to pick to be VP, and she picked Tim Walz. Then, of course, I gave her tremendous credit. Many others gave her tremendous credit for that. But there were post-leftists, again, I would call these people post-leftists, who saw that and still found...
Let me just pause real quick. So one thing I do want to say, so Kyle asked me, like, this was like, he asked me, like, I think like a week and a half before we did the actual debate, when I saw his comment reaching out asking if we would like want to come, or if I would want to come onto a show or whatever. And so just to be like totally vulnerable with you guys, I was super nervous. I'm pretty confident in my ability to articulate my points, and I think I make some pretty good points, and I think my arguments are sound. I think there are ways that I can improve for sure, and that's what I've been trying to do recently, is like sharpen that up a little bit. But I was like, I hate anxiety. It's my least favorite emotion. It's super triggering for me. It's like the reason why I drank as much as I did for years was because of anxiety. And so I was super, super, super nervous, which is, I think, one of the reasons why I did like a ton of prep. So it's just to like make sure that I was like well prepared for this kind of a situation. And then the morning of, I woke up at 7 a.m. The debate was at 8:30, and I was like very nervous going right up until about 8:30. And then the weirdest thing happened, where as soon as the conversation started, as soon as, and I mean it, like the moment he introduced me and Jessiah, all of that anxiety went away, all of it. And the whole time I felt completely composed, prepared for the conversation, confident in the points that I was making. That happens for me sometimes, like with like public speaking stuff. I've done public speaking before, and I'll be really, really nervous right up until the moment I start talking. And then as soon as I start talking, all of it just goes away. So yeah, that's my little insight into this conversation. This is me, like all of those nervous energy, all of that nervous energy just went completely, it just vanished as soon as we started having this conversation. So anyways, I'm not going to mute very much. I'm not going to pause very much. Okay, let's get back into it.
58 reasons to say that's not good enough. There's one other way in which I sympathize with your argument as well. I see RFK, for example, and Russell Brand types. These types go around and they say stuff like, well, the Democrats are now the party of Dick Cheney, so I can't support that. And right. I despise that argument because, okay, then the Republicans are the party of Lindsey Graham and Tom Cotton and Mike Pompeo. And if we do a count on it, there are more neoconservatives who support Trump and the Republicans than there are neoconservatives who support the Democrats. So if you want to do a fair analysis, you have to say the Republicans are more the party of neocons. So, and they don't do that. They just say, oh, Dick Cheney supports Democrats, therefore I'm against the Democrats. They don't do that other half of the analysis. So in those specific ways, we could start with this. I would say I'm sympathetic to your critique of my idea here, but later on I can get to defending my critique. So I'll let you guys respond to that. Go ahead, Jessiah.
No, so listen, I totally agree. I mean, a full disclosure, I'm one of these people that when I cover Liz Cheney, I say she is potentially on the road to redemption. I don't think she's there. And I say all the time, I don't think we should lionize or beatify her. Quite frankly, I believe in a transactional view of politics. To the extent that Liz Cheney is theoretically useful, in order to attract never-Trumpers, I say use her. And I think it's great that, you know, she had a change of heart and opposed Donald Trump, and participated in the January 6th commission. But I also recognize Donald Trump in 2021, January 6, 2021, was the same Donald Trump on January 20th, 2017. And Liz Cheney voted with Trump 93% of the time. And so to me, like these never Trump Republicans, I think also have to reckon with the fact that Trump didn't do some sort of Machiavellian transformation. You know, he's not Palpatine in the Star Wars prequels, where he pretends to be one thing and turned out to be a fascist. The next day, he was always transparently fascistic. So I factor all of that in. And I also think that sometimes the Harris campaign has gone too far in embracing Dick Cheney. I would have preferred, you know, a more measured approach. Like, hey, we appreciate the fact that despite substantive policy disagreements, which remain, that the Cheneys value country over party. We accept the endorsement. But Dick Cheney in particular, I would not be hugging him because I don't know to what extent he is useful. Liz Cheney, I have more sympathy towards because she's actively campaigning, trying to undermine the Republican Party. And in my opinion, they're the foremost threat to democracy and prosperity in this country, the foremost obstacle to progressive values.
Gotcha. All right, Hutch, go ahead and lay out kind of your thoughts and position here.
Yeah, so the number one priority that I have during the Trump era is defeating the Republican Party. Like, victory is the absolute highest priority on my list. Policy matters. Who she could appoint to her cabinet matters. What these agencies do with that power matters. But without victory, we've seen the consequences of what happens when we allow Republicans to control the levers of power. The most salient issue for probably most people on the left is Dobbs. And so I find myself in a bit of a frustrated position sometimes when I look at some of the response that I see from the left about various things. They seem to sort of dismiss the importance of the judiciary, for example. And so I take me and Josiah disagree a little bit here. I would accept an endorsement from literally Satan if I thought it netted us like 1 or 2 points in the aggregate. And I guess the question, the question becomes, how many votes do we potentially lose from progressives from her touting an endorsement from Liz Cheney? And how many never Trump voters could we possibly attract in states like Arizona or Pennsylvania? I suspect that's what we'll get into. But my calculus is that she probably does net some votes from a Liz Cheney endorsement. In a race this close, when the margins are by every reasonable metric extremely close in all 7 swing states, I think it's within 2 points in all 7 swing states. Every little bit counts, and so for me, it didn't seem to bother me the way that it bothered you guys.
So I would say I disagree both on the strategy of touting the Cheney's endorsement and the substance of touting the Cheney's endorsement. I can come back to that in a little bit, but first let me ask you, and I'll answer.
So my reasoning is it's just a numbers game, guys. So the latest data that I've seen showed that 12% of Republicans are not happy that Donald Trump is the nominee. And a strategy like touting an endorsement from Adam Kinzinger or Liz Cheney is obviously, they're obviously doing that to try to pick up some of those votes. Because a lot of those people, a lot of those like 12% that are not happy with Trump, a lot of them are still going to vote for Trump regardless, even though they're not happy. But if you can make a strong enough pitch to those people without making any kind of policy concessions, without saying that you're going to like cut taxes for wealthy people, then there is no downside to it. And neither I nor Josiah have seen any data to demonstrate that accepting Liz Cheney's endorsement has cost her any votes in the progressive wing. My instincts tells me that anybody who's claiming, well, I was going to vote for Kamala, but then she touted Liz Cheney as an endorsement, I feel like those people were not going to vote for her anyways. But yeah.
Answers from both of you would be good. We can start with Hutch, but
low energy Hutch. Listen, this was 8:30 in the morning. Okay. I'm not used to like talking into a microphone at 8:30. Okay.
What would you say so far in the campaign that Kamala has done, which is right, and what has she done that's wrong?
For me, the selection of Tim Walz, I was just going to say, for me, the selection of Tim Walz is huge because I've also been a big fan of Governor Walz long before the campaign. When he was like occasionally going out, he's not a high-profile Democratic governor, at least prior to this, the way that Gavin Newsom is, the way that Gretchen Whitmer is. But he would occasionally go on MSNBC and do the stump and make speeches. And when I look deeper into his record and what he was able to do with a single vote in the upper chamber of the Minnesota legislature, it's remarkable. This is a man who understands how to leverage power. And so for me, that is by far the most important thing that she's done. The fact that she went with somebody who doesn't have the name recognition or the profile and isn't the governor of a swing state as crucial as Pennsylvania, the way Governor Shapiro is, but somebody who's like, hey, listen, when I have majorities, I wield those majorities. I will push through my agenda. If Republicans want to get on board, that's great, but I will not let them cockblock me. I love that, and that just got my heart a little pitter-pattering. So I think that is by far the best thing that she has done. In terms of what she has done wrong, I don't know. I feel like, so like even the things that she's done wrong, like her reluctance to distance herself from President Biden, I understand some of the hesitation they're giving that he is the sitting president. I would probably say, I don't know. I would probably maybe the quote unquote embrace of Dick Cheney, or perhaps not having a pro-Palestinian speaker at the DNC. But I think these things, in the grand scheme of things, are relatively minor errors of the Harris campaign, and they certainly pale in comparison to what she's done right, in my opinion.
Hutch, what would you say she's done right and wrong?
I totally agree with Josiah about picking Tim Walz. I think I would have been fine if she picked Shapiro. There were some tactical reasons for why that would have been a sound decision, but Walz, I think, added something to her campaign that she really needed, this sort of like relatability. And in my opinion, he's been pretty fantastic. I actually think that her catering her message to the center is really smart in this climate right now. So I would praise her for that, for using rhetoric that might appeal to Nikki Haley primary voters, centrist, moderate Republicans, old school Republicans in states like Arizona, which may prove to be a crucial state. On the bad side, I guess the biggest criticism that I would have for her is that I think she probably should have had a more aggressive media schedule earlier on, though I do understand that she had very little time to cobble a campaign together. And so there's going to be a lot of like logistical things that you work out in the beginning, like who do you staff your campaign with, and sort of ironing out what your platform's going to be, what your messaging is going to be. I'm happy to see that she's going on a lot of alternative media podcasts right now. I think that was really smart that she went on Fox News. I think the idea of her going on Rogan is a little bit scary, but honestly, to me, she proved that she can, last night with her interview with Bret Baier, that she can handle those kinds of tough questions. And so, yeah, I mean, I think I wish she would have started doing that like 3 weeks ago. There was a part in a video that you made recently where you said one of the ways that you would differ yourself from Biden would be that you would say that you would have gone about Build Back Better differently, and you would have forced Joe Manchin to just go along with this piece of legislation. This is one of the big sticking points that I have with probably both of you guys.
Just do the thing. It's the patented leftist just do the thing tactic. Whatever thing you got to get done, the answer to getting it done is just do it. Just do the thing.
What does that look like when you say you're going to force Joe Manchin to sign on to legislation? Because when I look at every single president is going to be constrained by the Congress that they have. Even LBJ and FDR, who had absurd majorities in comparison to what Biden was working with in 2021. He had a 50-50 Senate, and what do we have, like an 8-seat majority in the House? And so you basically need perfect unanimity in the party if you want to pass any part of your agenda. I look at his legislative track record, and I'm impressed. Like, to me, Joe Biden has been the most successful president legislatively in the modern era, and it's
I agree.
Not even
domestically, I agree.
Particularly close. So yeah, I guess I would want to press you guys on, or press you, Kyle, specifically when you say you would force Joe Manchin to just sign on to Build Back Better. What does that actually look like in practice?
Okay, I'm glad you asked that question. That's a phenomenal question. So it's basically the carrot and stick approach. So you mentioned LBJ there, you mentioned FDR there. Yes, they had big majorities, but they also knew how to play politics in a way that modern day Democrats in the neoliberal era, I don't think they play politics nearly as well. So for example, Joe Manchin's daughter is a pharmaceutical criminal, and she's in part responsible for jacking up, what is it, the insulin prices colossally?
Don't remember.
I don't know if it was insulin or something else, but
I think it was insulin.
There was reporting on how his daughter is basically a pharma criminal. And for somebody like Joe Manchin or for somebody like Kyrsten Sinema, basically if you're president, you use the bully pulpit a little bit, you call them into your office and you say, look, you're a Democrat, you could be a hero and they'll build statues to you, or you'll be my biggest enemy. And so you get to choose.
So again, if this would have just been a viewer like in my Discord and we're debating this situation, I think I might have used a very different tactic to push back against this, because in my mind, this is a very unserious thing to propose.
Don't vote with Build Back Better, then the Democratic Party is going to use all of our resources to fund a primary opponent against you to try to take you out. Or if you do the right thing, like I said, they'll build statues to you. So use this is what politics always has been, right? There's a lot of ugly stuff that goes on behind closed doors, but if you're doing tactical stuff behind closed doors, that ends up getting the American people colossal wins that they need, like Build Back Better, which I think was
It's certainly not true in the modern era that it's very normal sort of politics to threaten to criminally investigate your daughter if you don't vote for a piece of legislation. I mean, Trump was openly corrupt about this kind of stuff, and he paid a price for it. He got kicked to the curb. He was made a one-term president. He was very ineffective legislatively. I get into it a little bit in my response here.
Phenomenal piece of legislation. I think that's how you do it. And I'm not saying it would have worked, because I don't know if it would have worked. But what I'm saying,
it wouldn't have worked.
Saying is, it would.
In fact, not only would it not have worked, it would have spectacularly backfired. It would have been. It would have been such a stain on Joe Biden's presidency if it came out, if the media started reporting that he threatened to criminally investigate someone's daughter, and the Democrats would have, and on top of that, the Democrats would have been clobbered in the midterms. Rightfully so. It would have been rightfully clobbered in the midterms.
It would have been the right path to at least get maybe more, as opposed to, we got the Inflation Reduction Act, which was good, but it was what, maybe 20% of what was in the original Build Back Better. So I just don't see that Biden and modern day Democrats, Obama, Clinton, they don't have the same sort of commitment to social democracy as, say, FDR had. And so they don't want to play that dirty game of politics behind the scenes. Whereas when you look on the Republican side, I think Trump does use the bully pulpit. He does use the carrot or the stick. He just uses it for really, really bad things, which we hate.
Can I just offer one other example
Sure.
that I think is a little more clear cut than, because you're right, Build Back, he could have promised Joe Manchin, like, I'm going to pave West Virginia in gold and you're going to be a hero. And, we're all, if you don't go with us, like,
the slow head nod and the eyes closed, that got me good, Hutch. You can see me like practicing restraint in this conversation.
Could have used that approach, and there's no guarantees that it would have worked because of who Joe Manchin is and his, political realities or whatever. There's no guarantees. But you also had a situation where they were trying to push through a $15 minimum wage increase. And they went to the parliamentarian and said, can we do this? And parliamentarian is not an elected official. There's nothing in the law that says you have to, that the decisions of the parliamentarian, which are really just meant to be guidance, are binding. What's more, you can hire a new parliamentarian at any time.
That's what Bush did.
And instead they're just like, no, they said no, so I guess we can't do it.
I'd like to respond to this if I may, because Hutch actually changed my mind on one of these things. So just again, full disclosure, I'm totally sympathetic. If you look at my Twitter feed or my YouTube videos, one of the things I advocate for is a more ruthless Democratic Party. It's one of the reasons why, again, I am so impressed by the selection of Governor Tim Walz, because again, this is a person who leverages power despite razor-thin majorities.
Correct.
If you have power and you're dealing with a minority opposition, you should do everything that is tactically feasible to push through your agenda. And I do think that Democrats sometimes struggle with that posture. Attorney General Merrick Garland, to me, is a classic example of a guy who, this was an appeal to bipartisanship. He was a successful prosecutor back in the day. He was a centrist judge, President Obama's Supreme Court nominee. And I almost like as a mulligan or a consolation prize, like, hey, we couldn't make you a Supreme Court justice, we'll make you an attorney general. I think he's a very intelligent man. I think in many ways he's been a disastrous attorney general because he has been so lethargic. He's quick to prosecute and investigate Democrats. He drags his feet when it comes to Donald Trump. So this to me is just a great example. However, I do think that the realities of the 50-50 split Senate would make it extremely difficult and very dangerous for President Biden to have put the sort of pressure on Joe Manchin that you talk about. So Joe Manchin being a very conservative Democrat in a state that is effectively unwinnable for the Democrats, there's no way that a Democrat's going to win West Virginia outside of Joe Manchin. I think that had President Biden done what you suggested, Kyle, it would have been very easy for Joe Manchin to say, you know what,
it would have destroyed Biden's presidency. It would have literally destroyed his presidency.
Going to switch parties. I'm either going to become an independent who may caucus with the Republicans, or I may just go ahead and switch parties and become a Republican anyway. And he actually probably would have increased his likelihood of winning re-election should he, if he had chosen to run for a second term. Kyrsten Sinema is more vulnerable, so I'm more sympathetic to the carrot and stick approach with her, since Arizona is a purple state. But it's not just that there's a risk of it not working. There's a risk of it backfiring spectacularly. And the only other thing I'll just say real quick to Krystal's point about the parliamentarian is I agree. President Biden could have pressured Chuck Schumer to fire the parliamentarian. That could have been done. But this is where actually Hutch persuaded me. He changed my mind on this because he pointed out that, if I remember correctly, Sinema and Manchin both opposed the $15 bill or provision in the bill. So even
the whole fire the parliamentarian thing was just so silly. They were pissed at Biden. They were calling him a paper tiger because he refused to pressure Schumer to just fire the parliamentarian, hire another one that would allow them to sneak the $15 an hour minimum wage into the ARP. But it wouldn't have made a difference. It wouldn't have mattered. It literally wouldn't have mattered. I mean, Manchin was against the $15 an hour minimum wage just on its face. Same with Sinema. And I would assume probably like 3 or 4 other people.
Even if they'd gotten it included in the bill, that probably just would have killed the bill. So sorry for, that's my spiel.
Go ahead, Hutch.
People bring up.
Go ahead, Hutch.
People bring up the parliament. Right. People bring up the parliamentarian as though it's an example of fecklessness, and to me, it's just an example of just pretty basic logic. Like it wouldn't have mattered if it fired the parliamentarian. Because, yeah, to Josiah's point, he's absolutely right. Both Sinema and Manchin, as far as I'm aware, were on the record against the $15 an hour minimum wage. And I have a sense that they probably wouldn't have been the only ones. Like, there might have been like 3 or 4 other Democratic senators who were not open.
They were the only ones that were publicly against the $15 an hour minimum wage.
About it, who might have voted against that $15 an hour minimum wage. When you talk about Joe Manchin's daughter in the bully pulpit, I don't really know what that means. It sounds like what you're saying is that Joe Biden should have
open a criminal investigation. Open a criminal investigation. If you don't vote for,
I had to hold back my chuckles. I'm being nice. Listen, this was a pleasant conversation. I'm not trying to go nuclear here, but yeah, in my head, I'm like, okay. How do I say this nicely?
Build Back Better. We're going to open a criminal investigation because she objectively is a criminal, not because it's bullshit and she's not a criminal. I'm not saying
if she's a criminal, then she should be prosecuted, and she certainly shouldn't not be prosecuted if her father signs off on a piece of legislation.
Who is supposed to make that? Who is supposed to make that threat? Who is supposed to make that threat?
Joe Biden, anybody in the administration, be very direct with them.
Presidents, just straight up, we have decades-long norms regarding the DOJ that were put in place after J. Edgar Hoover passed. And, he notoriously was like super corrupt and wielded the DOJ for political purposes. And then we also had like Watergate stuff. But I mean, like, we've had norms for decades now separating the DOJ and keeping it independent of presidents so that it's not used for political purposes, because that's just overtly corrupt, right?
Say, look, like I said, you'll be a hero or you'll be our biggest enemy. And it's not like the daughter isn't a criminal. I mean, I think she should be prosecuted anyway, but I'd be willing to not prosecute if Joe Manchin's vote comes on for either Build Back Better or at least a piece of
that's just, very blatant, overt corruption, right?
Legislation that is stronger than what the IRA ended up being.
Well, here's how I see that playing out. Joe Biden invites Joe Manchin into the Oval Office and says, listen, if you don't sign on to this Build Back Better as is, I'm going to sick Merrick Garland on your daughter. First of all, and if he actually relayed that plan to Merrick Garland, first of all, I think Merrick Garland would have resigned immediately and gone to the press and said, I cannot serve under a corrupt administration who would sick the DOJ on a political opponent to try to whip votes for a piece of legislation that I like. And I think, to Josiah's point, Joe Manchin would have immediately switched to either independent or Republican, and then there goes your majority, and you don't get any legislation done whatsoever.
But I don't know why that's corrupt.
This idea,
when you go into the comments of the video, because they posted a highlights portion which included this part, a lot of the comments were like, gullible, naive Hutch. He has no idea how power works in DC. Oh, norms? LOL. Norms? There's just an appetite for authoritarianism in leftist spaces online. So.
I don't want to speak for Hutch, but knowing him as I do, I'm confident he would agree with this. If you were able to produce polling which said, listen, yeah, Harris's approval rating or support among Republicans has gone from 5 to, I think, 9, according to the last New York Times Siena poll. But she's lost 15%, like in the same time, or like she's lost an equal or comparable or greater amount from liberals and otherwise people who are inclined to vote for her as a consequence of that. Then I think we'd all agree, well, then screw the Cheneys, jettison. We should always, if given a binary choice, I think we should just lean left more towards trying to appeal to the right. But I think Hutch's position, and this is where I feel, unless I can get evidence to the contrary, that accepting the endorsement of Liz Cheney, I just don't think, or have not seen data, that that's going to cost votes from the left flank. I can't imagine somebody's going to be like, hell yeah, I'm going to vote for
Now, Krystal says something here that I didn't really get to refute, but yeah.
Kamala Harris. She's accepted Tim Walz. But you know what? She said something nice about Liz Cheney, so I'm going to vote third party. I've just not seen any evidence.
Yeah, it's not the specific, you're right. It's not that specific thing. It's evidence of a potential broader trend which could be damaging.
Well, but I actually think there is evidence of this specific thing, which, you know, obviously
she dropped 2 points right when she did it.
Yeah, it's difficult to pinpoint, but she was doing better in the polls before she.
I think this is silly. I think literally in every single presidential race, the race tightens in the last month. I think it happens literally every single time. And she's assuming a causation correlation here. Like, so she's assuming that because the race tightened in the aggregates, in the data, she's working with this assumption or hunch that it's because Kamala, you know, embraced a Dick Cheney endorsement. And I'm highly skeptical that this is the case.
She leaned hard into the Cheney world, both Liz and Dick. You know, when she was bringing Tim Walz on board, when she was announcing her price gouging proposal, when she was getting attacked as a communist for daring to stand up to companies that are, you know, ripping off American consumers, that's when she was doing her best. And so the slippage hasn't been massive, but given that it's a very closely divided country, it is significant.
In YouTube chat, you said it's a few point drop too within the span of a huge gain. It's not even a few points. I think she's lost 1.5 to 2 points, like on average over the last like 2 weeks, which, yeah, again, that's actual statistical noise. And on top of that, so like if we go to like 538, for example, and we look at Pennsylvania, it would be easy to look at this and look at this and just become worried, right? So like all of a sudden now it shows that Trump is ahead by 0.3 points in Pennsylvania. Before she had a lead of looks like 1.8 points was like where she topped out. 1.9 points. I don't know if she ever got to 2 points. But then you look and it's like Atlas Intel, which is a right-wing aligned pollster, has it Trump +3. And then we have a pollster down here, New York Times, they have it +4, +3 for Harris. Another right-wing aligned pollster has it Trump +1. Another right-wing aligned has Trump +2. Tip Advantage, they went from, there's a delta between their registered voters and likely voters of 5 points. And I don't know how you're supposed to explain that. Like, there's no way the delta is that large between likely voters and registered voters. 5 points. So clearly, like, something is going on. There's a lot of like weird noise going on in their pollsters or in their polling. In order to like stress about Kamala, you know, the race tightening and maybe Kamala potentially losing her edge in a lot of these swing states, you have to work under this assumption that like we can just take all of these polls at face value. We just assume that all these polls are correct. And I don't know why you would, given what Republicans did in 2022 and what they're clearly doing again in 2024, which is just flooding the aggregates with their partisan polls. It's kind of ridiculous to me.
Significant and something we shouldn't ignore. And so now you're much more at like a 50-50 likelihood of success post Cheney world, you know, embrace, versus previously it was more like a 60-40. And again, those things are significant. I'm not saying it's 100% determinative, but you do have to look at what she was doing in the campaign when it was succeeding at its highest levels versus how they're doing at this point.
So I agree. I agree with you, but I also think she has since then, she's also saved it a little bit more. Like they've gotten better within the past few days because they're calling him a fascist and because she did the Fox News interview. But I agree with you that initially when it looked like that was going to be the trajectory, which is a very Hillary 2016 type trajectory, I was like, oh no, they're going to do it again. But let me ask you guys, because this is my grand theory, and I honestly call this the Goldilocks zone for campaigning. I'm curious what both of you think of it. So to me, I actually like the idea of Kamala self-branding. I'm a centrist. I'm a moderate. Say those words and say it in every single interview. I actually love that. But I want her to pair it with saying, I'm a centrist. That's why I want to do free school breakfast and lunch for kids like Tim Walz did in Minnesota. I'm a centrist. I want 12 weeks paid family leave and 12 weeks paid sick leave. So make that the centrist position and then run with it. And then it becomes like, you know, it's a branding thing. People be like, oh, Kamala, yeah, she's a centrist, right? But they associate that with good. Exactly. So what do you guys think of that?
I mean, I take your point. I mean, I feel like paid family leave has what, like 80% approval with the public?
It's about that, yeah.
Yeah, child tax credit, 70%, all those things are very popular.
Right. The difficult thing with public opinion polls for specific policies is that it doesn't necessarily indicate like, okay, it's going to be like 80% easy to get it done, because we all know that
obviously,
in the Congress, with the way that everything's set up, the Republicans have these institutional advantages, and it's just really hard to get popular policy over the finish line. I lost my train of thought there. Josiah, you want to jump in there?
I had a little bit of a brain fart there.
Well, no, I was going to say, so it's funny. I'm reminded of what Governor Walz said recently. It was like, one man's
I remembered, but that's why it's good to have Josiah in the back pocket there.
Socialism is another man's neighborliness. And he got grilled on this, or at least she attempted to do so, Shannon Bream on Fox News. So she's like, so, this is the dictionary definition of socialist. So is this what you're getting at? And he's like, no, it's just that Donald Trump refers to anything Democrats ever tried to do ever as socialism.
Yeah,
and I'm saying
that really well.
Right, exactly. I'm saying that lazy, lax definition just refers to basic common sense things.
Let me.
Sorry, I was
just gonna say real quick,
okay,
as far as like the moderate thing, I'm not the person to ask on this, Kyle, because when I hear the word centrist, I get triggered immensely because I have enormous contempt for it. But you're right. I mean, there is obviously an appeal to that, and maybe a branding campaign, just like she's trying to do with patriotism. This idea that patriotism is actually a liberal or progressive value because we love our country enough to recognize that it has issues that we need to fix, whereas Republicans and this cult of personality, they don't love America. They love Donald Trump and would gleefully sell this country and all of its constituents down the river. So there may be some utility in what you're talking about.
Go ahead, Josiah.
I also want to say that there's a little bit of it's a tricky situation with politics right now, and in terms of like what you run on for your legislative agenda, because I feel like you're kind of damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. Like typically in this country, politicians will run on their agenda, and oftentimes it'll be a very ambitious agenda that maybe they even know they're likely not going to be able to get from the Congress that's elected that next session. So we heard, I feel like Joe Biden has got a lot of criticism for promising a $15 an hour minimum wage, and that didn't happen. Promising like more student loan debt, that didn't happen because of the Supreme Court and other factors. And so, if you run on I feel like if she gets a 50-50 Senate, which it looks like that's probably the best that we can get, and that even that's kind of a long shot right now. Yeah. The Senate's not looking great. I feel like she's taking a different approach of actually trying to promise policies that seem realistic in their ability to get done. Like if she was running on Medicare for all right now, it might get a lot of like young progressives excited, but there would be no way for I think all of us would probably agree, there would be no way that would pass in the next Congress. And so it seems to be a different strategy that like Biden took with over promising. She seems to be going a more realistic route. I personally kind of appreciate that honesty, and I'm curious what you guys have to say about that.
She is running on getting rid of medical debt. That was one of the original things that she.
It's a bit of a catch-22 with a lot of like leftist creators, because they'll encourage the candidate to run on these really progressive policies that basically stand no chance in hell of actually passing in the Congress. And then when the president comes in and tries to actually get those policies done and fails, they call them ineffective. And so, yeah, to me, it just feels a little bit silly.
We should also say that and at the risk of sounding like too much of a sycophantic lib, she stepped into this campaign. I'm guessing she probably didn't really have a notion that she was going to be the nominee before the debate. Maybe there was some behind the scenes diminishing cognitive stuff for Biden that I'm unaware of, but my sense is that she probably didn't think about that until the day after the debate. And so she came in and she cobbled together a campaign in a really short amount of time. She didn't have a lot of time to put together a platform policy to like do some polling and reach out and figure out what would land best with the voters. And so I do understand these criticisms. I think we should also recognize the fact that she's had 3 months to do this, and she turned a losing race into right now it is a bit of a coin toss, but you would rather be her. Like she is leading in the Rust Belt states that she needs to win within the margin of error, but you would rather be her than Trump right now. And so, I do want to like validate those criticisms. I don't think they're necessarily invalid. I also think that it's pretty remarkable what she did. She turned, Biden was down on average like 2, 3, 4 points in every single swing state. And boy, in such a short amount of time, she was able to, turn that around and turn this into a real race. And so,
yeah.
And to bring it full circle, Kyle, I will say, initially she had such a broad coalition. She earned very quick endorsements from Senator Sanders and Representative Ocasio-Cortez and Joe Manchin. But then she drove Manchin away, baby. She pissed him off by saying,
count that as a W.
She's got to break the filibuster.
Right.
Yeah, I would love to see. I would love to see a counterfactual where that initial energy of they're weird, we're not going back, freedom, patriotism, we're going to ban the price gouging. She was just hitting them over and over and over. And there was a moment there where I remember on my show, I was talking about this might be a landslide. If this trajectory continues, she's going to be up 9, 10, 11 points on election day, and we won't even have to sweat it out on election night. I wish we could know if that trajectory continued and it wasn't the sort of like, hey, I got a lot of Republicans, like what it would look like. You know what I mean? Because obviously my take is I think we'd be up more if she didn't do that. Whereas, Hutch, I know your take is not necessarily. Maybe what she's doing right now is
I think her embracing Liz Cheney's endorsement for sure has netted her some votes. I don't know what that count is, but people are entirely, especially people online, are entirely too dismissive of this notion that there are never Trump Republicans out there, that there are Republican voters out there that are dissatisfied, extremely dissatisfied with the state of the party because of Donald Trump. And those people are looking, many of them are thinking about abstaining, which, I mean, I'll take that, but it would be even better if we got those people to understand that Kamala Harris, she may have some policy disagreements with you, but she's going to be a good president. She's going to, at the very minimum, like help protect our institutions, make sure that our democracy remains healthy, or makes it healthier. And I think you can make a convincing argument to people. And I think that argument is easier to make when you have people like Liz Cheney in your corner.
It could also be the fact, guys, that the Republicans, as we know, this is just an objective fact, they are flooding these aggregates with right-wing aligned pollsters, the same that they did in 2022.
Yep.
That is not cope. So we could be having this conversation right now about stressing about how close the election is. And then once we get to election day, to me, like I'm kind of bullish on her winning all 7 swing states, to be honest with you guys.
But to your point about that, the 2022 thing, almost everybody was saying red wave. And I did not say that. So I just want to put that out there because I know there was a time where Hutch may have thought maybe that I had bad political instincts, but I saw Trump coming from a mile away in 2016. I said he was going to win the nomination after 2 or 3 states. I knew Joe Biden was going to win in 2020, and I was one of a few people who didn't say red wave in 2022. I'm just saying. I
just watched a video from you recently, though, where you said that you didn't commit one way or the other. You didn't want to commit one way or the other.
But listen, I was in a scenario where everybody around me would say red wave, red wave.
I did my homework, Kyle. I did. I watched like 15 of his videos.
Red wave, red wave. I'm reading these reports all day. Red wave, red wave, red wave. And all I was a bitch. I wasn't strong enough to say it's going to be good for Democrats like Michael Moore said and Energementum said. But I did say I'm not buying this red wave thing because 51% of the Republican candidates are election deniers and Republicans just overturned Roe v. Wade. And a lot of these people are crazy, like Blake Masters and Carrie Lake and Doug Mastriano. So I'll give myself a half pat on the back, not a full one.
Well, then I got to know where you are on this one because I got out of the prophecy business. I don't make predictions. I did not expect Donald Trump to win the 2016 election, and I thought the midterms.
I'll do it. I'll make a prediction. I think she's going to win.
We're going to be a red wave blowout. I was screaming from the rooftops like this is the end. It was totally apocalyptic. So I'm out of the prophecy business. I am curious though what you make of her chances based on now, but also in terms of getting a trifecta. And the only reason, just to tee this up, is it's so important to stress to your audience, it's not enough for Vice President Harris to beat Donald Trump. That's probably the single biggest component, but we need a
$5 bet. No, I did a $500 bet, bro.
A trifecta because I'm convinced that if we have a president.
If it was legal for me to vote on, to bet on Polymarket, I would. Well, I don't know. Are we confident that they're going to pay out these bets? I don't know anything about Polymarket. Aren't they like a foreign crypto-based betting site or something like that? Maybe I wouldn't bet. I don't know. Do they have a good track record of paying their bets, of paying the winnings? It's owned by Peter Thiel. Okay, you wouldn't be able to fit a pine needle up my ass on election night. I'm gonna be nervous for sure, but I mean, as of right now, I feel pretty good about the state of the Democratic Party. I feel pretty good about the state of the American electorate. They've just demonstrated over and over and over since Trump entered the political space. After he won, of course, they've just rejected his version of governance and they've rejected the Republican Party, consistently all over the country. I don't see that like not happening on election night. I think people have good reasons to reject their politics. It's ugly, it's dishonest, it's toxic. And I think they're going to continue to pay a price for as long as they let this like MAGA thing like determine how the party functions. As long as they hitch their wagons to MAGA, I feel like they're going to keep losing over and over again.